Hey everybody, it's Irene with BrainStormAcres. And lately you guys have been watching us scurry around a lot. And there have been a lot of questions asked about what exactly is it that I do. So I thought I'd share. This morning, like so many other mornings, poor Henry has to drive someplace to pick up some new mitts for the dog. And I am home by myself. And Henry said, hey, in between, when you need a break, how about doing a video? Because we've been getting so many questions about what it is you do. So this is what I do. About really close to 30 years ago, Henry and I used to enjoy going to rent fairs and things like that. And somebody that we knew, that we worked with, said, hey, you guys really enjoy rent fairs and stuff. Why don't you come with us this weekend to an event that's being held? It'll be fun. You'll have a good time. You'll meet a bunch of people who are like-minded, and yeah, and the rest is kind of history. We did go to the event. We scraped together something to wear on short notice. It was fine. It kind of went from there, and we became more and more involved. And to cut a long story short, at some point we realized there were things that we wanted that we couldn't easily purchase. So, you know, there's always things like sewing and embroidery and stuff like that you can do. I grew up in a household that did lots of that sort of stuff. So it wasn't a big stretch to just simply change the subject matter or the style of sewing and embroidery and things like that. But having always been interested in jewelry and metalwork and things, I took the opportunity, when I had the opportunity, to attend a local community college to broaden my capabilities in terms of metalwork production. And it was just sort of a natural thing that evolved. I was making things for Henry and I, and people said, gee, could you make that for me too? And I said, sure, I don't see why not. And then there was a lot of custom work. And at some point, as the economy was changing and our regular jobs were sort of going away or being modified, I decided that, well, I wouldn't mind doing this at least part of the time. I had a couple of friends who were already doing it, and they were doing something different than I was. They were making clothing, so I was not in direct competition if I made jewelry and accessories. I have a master's degree in anthropology with a specialization in archaeology, so doing the research was not a big deal. I also have a minor in history from my undergraduate, and I've always enjoyed history and the things that go with it. It's fascinating to me to go to a living history museum, for instance, and my kids will tell you that when we went to them when they were kids, trying to get mom away from certain spots was always a kind of a challenge. Usually I'd be at the blacksmith shop or the shoemaker shop or maybe the basket maker shop, but you know, good stuff. Anyway, oh, the barrel maker stuff, that was even better, because I could combine the metalworking and the woodworking. Yeah, because I enjoy woodworking too. So it was a natural development in terms of building on what I already enjoyed doing. And we experimented about, I want to say 17 years ago, maybe 18 years ago, around in there, going to an event that was not local, but way within the state. At the encouragement of a friend who was also attending, we got booths next to one another so that when somebody needed a potty break or something like that, the other person could watch. It's helpful, you know, we shared a few meals, that's another thing, so you don't have to cook all the time. And we certainly did not make $1 million, but we enjoyed ourselves, and we said, we can do this. So that's kind of the way it started. And as I was doing things, I had to look, as any business person does, at the market and see what was flooding it and what wasn't it. So at the time, one of the big hobbyist things was making glass beads, which was one of the things I was doing. In fact, a primary thing I was doing, because I learned to make glass beads a long time ago as a hobby and as a fun thing to do. And I had done the research to do historically accurate glass beads. So I was making necklaces and bracelets and things like that. And I figured out that the one thing that people really couldn't casually do was cast metal. They could, with relatively little financial input, cast pewter, because pewter is a soft metal that melts at about 600 degrees, depending on exactly the alloy. You could actually do that on a camp stove or on your kitchen stove if you're particularly brave. I prefer, if I have to do it on a stove, to do it on a camp stove because I don't want to do it in the house. But certainly it's something you can easily do in a barely controlled environment and have great success. I had learned to do soapstone carving to create molds, and I was making pewter. And that sold really well because that was not as common. But what really was the ticket for me was the fact that I could cast bronze and silver. And because those require specialized equipment, I had picked up stuff used. I had picked up stuff on super sale. One of my suppliers would do super sales usually once a year, sometimes more frequently, where they had equipment that had been used for teaching classes. And so it was used equipment, but it had only been used maybe 2 or 3 times, even a dozen times. But they didn't want to store it on the shelf, so they would sell it for half, maybe 3/4 of the original price, usually about half. And I picked up a whole bunch of things that I would need for casting what we call hot metals, which would be bronze, which is 2,000 degrees, and sterling, which it depends on the system you have, but anywhere between 1780 and 1900 degrees. So still hot, Fahrenheit, by the way, Fahrenheit. So hot stuff, and requires special equipment. And then it was just a matter of deciding what I wanted to cast. So I listened to my customers. They said, gee, would we really like to have this? Could you make something like this for me? And my answer was, let me try. And after a while, my answer became short because I knew what I was doing. I knew I could accomplish things. I no longer rely on soapstone as my main mold-making compound. I usually use modern equipment now because my equipment is all basically modern. I mean, I can do it the hard way, but why would I'm going to have to charge you 14 times more. So what I started doing was creating the things that people needed to augment, accentuate, improve their outfits for historic reenactors. The group that we play with most of the time specializes in pre-1600s civilizations. Technically, you could do any civilization in the world before 1600. The recommendation is only civilizations that had direct contact with Europeans at the time. So, as you'll know, that is the age of exploration when the ships from the various European powers like Spain and France and in those days even Portugal was a major power, and England were running around the world and conquering various colonial, creating colonies, places for trade purposes. They didn't cover the whole world, but an awful lot of it. And I started making the things that people needed for their outfits. Obviously, modernly, we have a lot of options. We have Velcro, which they didn't have. We have zippers, which they didn't have. We have buttons, which they did have. And we have all kinds of hooks and things. Now, hooks and such like that are less commonly used modernly. Even a lot of the skirts and stuff when I was a kid used hooks. And some still do today, but most things have switched to elastic, unless you're getting higher-end clothing. It takes more effort and skill to install buttons and hooks than it does to work with stretchy fabric and things like that. So there was obviously very little stretchy fabric. There is some stretch to natural fiber, especially on the bias, and that's a whole nother topic of conversation, which I will not go into. I'm not teaching sewing. But I learned to make all those hooks and buttons and things like that that people needed. I still also make jewelry like necklaces and earrings and custom pieces. I do all kinds of odd bits and pieces that people need. Over time, as I learned to make glass buttons, which was a bit of a process, I knew there was such a thing. I had the documentation for it. I had to figure out how to make it. And I had to figure out how to make them economically. In other words, I can't charge $35 a button unless I'm doing something really amazing for them. Now, if you sew, and if you sew high-end clothes, you will know that there are plenty of buttons out there that go for that kind of money. Certainly $5, $6, $10 a button is not uncommon for high-quality, not China, junk-made buttons. But you're trying to have a variety so that pretty much anyone can afford things if possible. And as my business went on, it's been going on for over 17 years now. And before that, I had done it more casually, but this is where I really formalized it. You know, I had a small business in California, but we didn't really go to events at that point. It was mostly custom work. And when we moved here, we set up a different business here, different state, different license sort of thing. And we formalized it more. The area that we lived in, live in currently, has very high unemployment. And what employment is available here is mostly minimum wage. And you can't live off that. You really can't. So, and to be honest, I did my bit of minimum wage when I was in college. I'm really not interested in that anymore. So if I wanted to work here, it either had to be remote work, which at the time was not that common, although when we first moved here, Henry did have a remote work. He was working as an editor for an online magazine, and he's done that a lot of times in the past. If I wanted to bring in any kind of income, I had to be willing to do something that could be done remotely. And Etsy had come up, and the rest is history, because I sell during the year when I'm not actually going to events on Etsy. And I'll make sure that Henry puts my Etsy address in the show notes. The vast majority of what I make has very little to do with modern society. I now do a lot of wholesale work for people on the East Coast who are specializing in Civil War, colonial, that sort of thing, down as far as Victorian. And that is limited. Those are things that would be used to close your clothes, like different kinds of pins and safety pins, and we call them unsafe safety pins because they don't have the safety closure that we get on a modern safety pin, and buttons and veil pins and things like that. For people outside of that Civil War colonial group, I do award tokens for the organization that we play with. I do, again, more specialized buttons and toggles and things like that for various cultures like Roman and Anglo-Saxon and things like that. And that's what I do. I spend some portion of my time all year round keeping things in stock for my Etsy shop and shipping things off to people around the U.S. Right now, we are only doing 3 events a year. There was a time when we did about 8, which is pretty grueling because you're only home for a brief period in between. And because we're not resellers, I can't just call a company when I'm on the road and say, hey, I need 15 dozen of these, ship them to my P.O. box. I have to get my tush back into the studio and make them. So when I accept, like I just spoke with somebody who contacted me privately about a custom order this week, and I said, okay, I can do what you're asking, but I need to know what the time frame is because I am booked. I am solidly booked between the event I'm attending and the event I'll be attending in October, and I have another custom order in front of his. But he didn't have a problem with waiting for September. So we're good to go. And that's what I do. Why don't I do modern jewelry? Well, because everybody and his sister does it. And when I do modern jewelry, although I can usually do okay at my local art fairs and stuff like that, I'm trying to think about how to say this nicely. I don't like your average person on the block. Okay? They're rude. They will try and tell you how crappy your stuff is so that they can get a better price. Have I ever had that happen in the group that I play with? I figure once per event I have that happen. At least once per event. But the events include attendance of anywhere from 2,500 to 10,000 people. So if I have to put up with that once or twice in a week or in a 2-week period, I can live with that. If you're going to a modern art show, there's always somebody who's like, but I can buy that crap from China for cheaper. Okay, do it. I guarantee my work. I guarantee that my work has been put together correctly. You have my contact information. If something were to break through my negligence, I'll replace it or repair it. If something breaks through your negligence, we can discuss on what you're going to pay to have it repaired. You're not going to reach a China company and say, oh, one of my earrings broke, I want you to replace it or repair it. Well, you can try, but generally speaking, that's one of those, yes, failed hopes, shall we say. So I just really don't enjoy doing much in the way of art shows. There's a local one here that I will do usually a couple times a year. And it's pretty okay. It's a good excuse to see my neighbors. But you don't make big bucks there. You'll have maybe 100 people show up, maybe 200 if you're really lucky. Why would I spend a bunch of time making something for 100 people or even 200 people when I can spend that same amount of time making something for 2,500 people or 10,000 people? So, yeah, I'd rather do the cool stuff, to be honest, rather than just knocking out a bunch of ordinary earrings. I still have some ordinary earrings in stock. I will probably do my local art event sometime this fall before Christmas, because that's a good time of year to put stuff out there, because usually somebody is actually looking for a gift, and sometimes they're willing to spend a little bit more for something that's not made in China. And also I do a lot of custom work. So if I go to an event, like the event we're going to be going to in Pennsylvania, I have supplies with me so that if somebody says, I really like that necklace, could you make me a pair of matching earrings? And this is exactly how long the dangle should be, and this is how, I can go through my stuff and say yes or no and make them on the spot. We agree on a price ahead of time, and usually the next day they have them, depending on how busy I am. Sometimes I get backed up a little and it'll be a couple of days out. But, custom rosaries, custom earrings, custom bracelets, that sort of stuff. Yeah. And my prices are based on what the materials cost me plus my labor. So a lot of times I will get people who break a necklace at war or something like that and who really want to be able to wear it, and they'll bring me usually a sandwich bag, sometimes still with crumbs in it, full of their stuff, and have me fix it. And we do joke about the crumbs a lot of times because it is kind of funny to get, you're like, oh, and you had peanut butter. I can see the peanut butter on there. I'll clean that off when I make the necklace. It is, people find it, I have customers who have been buying that way from me for years, where they bring me pieces that were gifted to them that were not appropriately put together or are the wrong length, or they've changed their outfits, so they need the length of something to be changed. Women would know this particularly. I don't think guys particularly are that tuned into it, but the length of your necklace should depend on what kind of a shirt you're wearing, or a blouse, or whatever. So do you want your necklace to be inside of your shirt collar and barely sort of peeking out, or do you want it to be on the outside where it's really bold and out there? And, if it breaks, what do you do with it? Do you just throw it away? Do you store it and hope that someday you can afford to get it repaired? What do you do? So I get a lot of that sort of repair work at war, and that's what we call our events war. They're usually wars that The one in Pennsylvania is the Penzic War. The one in Southern California that we just did is the Protero War. Some of them are called wars without enemies because we always say we're all friends. We just call it a war because that's what they've chosen to call it. But yeah, that's what I do. And hope that answers some of your questions. I do stringing and things like that, but I also do a lot of casting and custom work. So yes, until next time, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because obviously we have a lot going on. Henry's in the process of upgrading our irrigation and stuff like that in the greenhouse. I'm going to be planting some things out in the next week into the existing beds in the garden, which means I have to update the irrigation on some of that. We're trying to work around some of the worst weather we've had in a long time in terms of heat. It's a little cooler this week than it was last week. It's only in the high 80s, but it's more humid. So, you know, you get really spoiled when you're used to like 10, 15% humidity and you suddenly have to deal with 45, 55, 60% humidity. You're going, because you sweat. This just doesn't work as well. That's why we're supposed to sweat. We're not supposed to sweat in like tropical weather because it doesn't do you any good. So until next time, bye. Oh, and keep brainstorming because obviously we are. Somebody is sleeping. I can hear him snoring. He doesn't usually snore, but he has a cold or something, so yeah. He's sleeping. The cat is sleeping in the pantry, so you can't hear her snore.